I'm on a mission to reach my first 1,000 subscribers, and I need your support. If you love movies, reviews, and great stories, hit that subscribe button and join me on this journey. Thank you.
A deadly zombie virus outbreak spreads like wildfire, infecting most of the world's population and turning them into relentless walking corpses. The virus spreads so quickly that every baby born after the disaster is already infected, destined to become a zombie. Humanity teeters on the edge of extinction, but one boy, Mako, miraculously survives. His father builds a home deep in the forest, shielding him from the outside world. But when the undead inevitably breach their sanctuary, Mako loses the only protection he's ever known. Now he's alone, forced to face the nightmare head-on. Ever since he could remember, Mako had lived in the wilderness with his father. No friends, no playmates, just the two of them. His father would leave to hunt during the day, while Mako stayed behind, waiting. He carried a gun for protection, but it was more for comfort than anything else. He had no idea how to use it. Mako's father was a quiet man. If he wasn't hunting, he was setting traps. Meanwhile, Mako spent his days reading and listening to music, teaching himself how to survive and finding joy in solitude. A faint M was etched into Mako's wrist. He believed it stood for his name. He loved the letter so much that one day he tried carving it into a tree. But before he could finish, his father appeared from behind and clamped a hand over his mouth. "You have to always listen," his father warned, voice low but firm. Mako didn't fully understand, but he obeyed. His father feared that drawing attention, even something as simple as marking a tree, could bring trouble. Mako was still too weak. His father couldn't protect him forever. "One day when you're strong enough, you'll find your own fairy," he always said. Mako treasured a book called The Leaf of the Tree, a fairy tale about a magical forest that protected those who lived within it. That book was his world. One day while wandering the woods, Mako stumbled upon something strange, a metal trailer. Someone was living there. He could feel it, but he was too afraid to check. That night he sketched the trailer in his notebook, once, then twice. Curiosity gnawed at him. Finally, when his father wasn't paying attention, Mako made an excuse to fetch water and snuck back to the trailer. This time he opened the door and crept inside. Everything was neat and organized. There were even children's toys. Another kid must have lived here. Then, movement. A shadow emerged from the dimly lit space. Mako's heart pounded. He took a step back, ready to run. But as the figure stepped closer, he realized it was another child. "Ha ha, I get so lonely," the boy said with a small smile. Mako hesitated but sensed no danger. He took off his headphones and handed them over. The boy placed them over his ears, his face lighting up in wonder as he heard music for the first time. That was all it took. They became friends. The boy's name was Miko. His name also started with M. Mako found that funny. He showed Miko the faded mark on his wrist, as if proving their connection. Then he took Miko's hand and drew an M on it. "Have you ever met bad people?" Mako asked. "My dad says they're scared of the forest, but the forest let you in, so you must be good." Miko nodded. "I've never done anything bad." To prove it, he gave Mako his favorite toy. As the sun dipped lower, Mako realized he was late. His dad would be angry. He ran home, but just as he left, he sensed something behind him. Instinct kicked in. Mako dove into the bushes and turned back. A woman stood there, a gun in her hands. She exhaled sharply, relieved to see only a child. It was Miko's mother. Her expression softened when she noticed the toy Mako was holding. "That man in the forest, is he your father?" she asked. "Is it just the two of you? Do you have a mother?" For the first time, Mako wondered why he had never thought about that. Why didn't he have a mother? The woman handed him a bag of fruit before sending him off. Mako didn't leave right away. He lingered, watching as Miko's mother pulled her son into a warm embrace. Something inside him ached. That must feel nice. But he couldn't stay. He hid the toy Miko had given him, grabbed the fruit, and hurried home. His father scolded him for forgetting the water, but when he saw the bag of fruit, he assumed Mako had been out picking them. He let it slide. That night, as Mako sat with his father, he thought about Miko and his mother. He wanted to hug his dad, but when he tried, his father stiffened and gently pushed him away. The next time he went to get water, Mako retrieved the toy he had hidden. Over the next few weeks, he kept seeing Miko's mother. She was kind, gentle, the way Mako imagined his own mother would have been. One day, he couldn't hold it in anymore. "Do I have a mom?" he asked his father. His father didn't answer. That night, Mako saw him checking the security cameras. Something was wrong. Then everything fell apart. That morning, his father went out to hunt as usual. But not long after, a strange, guttural roar echoed through the trees. A gunshot rang out in the distance. His father froze. "Mako, hide!" Mako obeyed, crouching low in the grass. But then he saw her, Miko's mother, kneeling on the ground, her body covered in wounds. Not long after, Mako's father arrived at the scene, sending a wave of terror through him. He had never imagined his father could be so ruthless. Overwhelmed with fear, he ran home, threw himself onto his bed, and pretended to be asleep, hoping his father wouldn't suspect that he had seen everything. When his father returned, he was a completely different man, agitated, shouting like a madman. Mako was terrified. He put on his headphones and blasted music, but his father's voice still seeped through. "They can't have it. It can't be it." That night, Mako dug out his father's old camcorder, the one he always watched. The tapes inside held fragments of the past, happy memories of his parents. As he watched, he saw himself as a baby, and his sister. Then his mother appeared on screen. She was pregnant, laughing with his father as they imagined their unborn child's future. But suddenly the footage shifted. Her face changed, fearful, hollow, like she was being hunted. In the final clip, she stood outside, staring into the camera, her voice shaking. See, you need to know, I never wanted to leave you. This is my last message to you." The video cut off. It was her farewell. Mako sat frozen. His mother was dead. Had his father killed her? The thought was unbearable. That night, he waited until his father fell asleep, then locked him inside the house. Grabbing a small bag of essentials, he left before dawn. His first stop was Miko's house. He wanted to take Miko away from this nightmare of a forest, but Miko refused. He wanted to wait for his mother. Mako had no choice but to tell him the truth. "She's never coming back. My father, he's not who I thought he was. He turned my mother into ashes." Mako felt guilty, but Miko didn't get angry. Instead, he stepped forward and hugged Mako gently. It was the first time anyone had ever hugged Mako. For the first time, he felt safe. The two boys walked together, talking softly. But suddenly, Mako stopped. After years of living with his father, he had learned to sense danger. Even though he couldn't see anything, he knew something was out there. He grabbed Miko's hand. "We can't go any further." And then, the zombies emerged. One by one, they staggered out from the trees, their lifeless eyes locking onto the boys. Mako pulled Miko and ran. They spotted an old rusted truck and scrambled inside. But the undead swarmed them in seconds, shaking the vehicle violently. Any moment now, they would tip it over. The boys trembled inside, helpless. Then, just as the truck was about to give way, the door suddenly burst open. Mako's father stood there. After waking up and finding Mako gone, he had panicked. Grabbing his gun, he searched the forest frantically. The first place he checked was Miko's home, but it was empty. Fear turned to desperation. He searched everywhere until finally he found them. Mako's father yanked him out of the truck, patting him down, checking for injuries. Only then did Mako realize all the zombies around them had already been killed or driven away by his father. His father tried to take him home, but when he saw Miko still inside the truck, he hesitated. Miko looked at them, his eyes full of silent hope. Before his father could decide, more growls erupted from the forest, closing in fast. Without another thought, he grabbed Mako's hand and pulled him away, ignoring Mako's desperate cries for Miko. Deep in the forest, Mako yanked his arm free. "You're a monster! You're just like them!" he shouted. "You killed Miko's mother, and my mother too, didn't you?" His father's face darkened. The snarls of the undead grew louder. His father didn't argue. He just pulled Mako into a hiding spot, then ran back out with his gun. Mako watched as his father fought through the horde, heading toward the truck where Miko was still trapped. For a brief moment, hope sparked in Mako's chest. Maybe his father wasn't as bad as he thought. But then, a zombie lunged at him. Mako barely had time to react. His hands trembled as he lifted his father's gun and pulled the trigger. The gunshot echoed through the trees. Hearing it, Mako's father turned back. In his rush, he tripped, and a zombie tackled him to the ground. He barely managed to fight it off. When he finally got back on his feet, his eyes locked onto Mako, alive and unharmed. Relief flooded his face. Then Mako saw it. Blood, dripping from his father's arm. He had been bitten. His father went still. He knew. There was no coming back from this. He knelt before Mako, his hands trembling as he cupped his son's face. Over and over, he stroked his cheeks, memorizing his features one last time. Then he backed up against a tree, locking himself in place, afraid of what he would become. With the last of his strength, he spoke. "Back then, your mother was bitten. She was going to turn. I couldn't let her become one of them. I had to do it myself." His voice broke. "It was the hardest thing I've ever done." Mako felt his chest tighten. His father's breathing grew ragged. His limbs twitched. The infection was spreading fast. "I can't go with you anymore, Mako. But you have to survive." He never finished the sentence. His body jerked. His eyes glazed over. And then, he was gone. Mako watched his father suffer, his heart pounding in his chest. He wanted to help. He should help. But his father's words echoed in his mind. "Run. Don't look back." So he ran. Hand in hand with Miko, Mako forced himself forward. Then, bang! A gunshot shattered the silence. Mako stopped. His breath caught in his throat. He knew. His father was gone. Just like that, he and Miko were alone. Orphans. With nowhere to go, they wandered aimlessly, clinging to the only thing that gave them hope, the Book of Leaves. That book carried a legend, a promise. If they could reach Stone Valley, they would find the White Fairy, a mystical being who could lead them away from evil, to a place where they could live in peace. And so they walked. They ate wild fruit when they were hungry, slept curled up together when they were cold. Days passed before they finally stumbled upon a small house. Outside, a middle-aged man sat basking in the sunlight, completely at peace, like the world hadn't been overrun by the dead. Desperate for food, the boys approached, pleading for help. The man hesitated, then sighed. They were just kids. He let his guard down. As they ate, they told him about their journey. He wanted to help, wanted to take them to Stone Valley, but he couldn't. His own children had turned into zombies long ago. He couldn't bring himself to kill them. Instead, he had locked them in cages. That way, he could still see them, still watch over them, every single day. Watching Mako and Miko eat, something flickered in his eyes. Hope. Could there be a cure? He remembered something. Every child born that year carried the virus. If these two hadn't turned, maybe there was still a way to save the others. Once they finished, Mako and Miko continued on. Following an abandoned railway, they came across an old train station. A train still sat there, frozen in time. Curious, they climbed into the cabin, pressing buttons, messing with the controls, even blowing the horn. The sound echoed across the empty wasteland. Then they saw it. Several train cars sealed shut. They peeked through the cracks and froze. Something was in there. Something wrong. Before they could run, a voice growled behind them. "Don't move!" Two men with guns. The boys were taken back to their base. There, the leader of the group studied Miko. His wide, innocent eyes. His angelic face. So pure. So untainted. The leader liked that. Miko would be their symbol of hope. Proof that some could survive uninfected. But Mako? The leader saw him as a problem. Two children immune to the virus? That would make people believe in something. And belief was dangerous. False hope could get people killed. The leader ordered Mako's execution. That night, a guard came to take Mako away. But instead of killing him, he let him go. Run! Mako didn't. He wouldn't leave Miko behind. When night fell, he snuck into Miko's room and shook him awake. Together, they escaped. By the time the leader realized what had happened, it was too late. His precious symbol was gone. Enraged, he shot the guard who had disobeyed him. Mako and Miko kept moving. They walked for hours until Miko's voice broke the silence. "I'm thirsty." Mako told him to wait while he searched for water. Inside an abandoned building, he found some. He also found clothes and shoes. But just as he was about to return to Miko, he heard them. The leader and his men had found Miko. This time, there was no talk of symbols, no hope, only death. Miko was a loose end, and loose ends needed to be cut. Before they could pull the trigger, a drone appeared overhead. Gunfire exploded. The leader dropped dead. Mako rushed outside, desperate to reach Miko. But soldiers were everywhere. Miko, despite his simple mind, understood. He shook his head at Mako. "Stay back. Don't come near me." One of the soldiers caught movement in the shadows. He raised his gun, stepped forward. Miko saw it. He reached down, grabbed a fallen gun. Bang! The shot rang out. Miko crumpled to the ground. Mako's world went silent. No father, no friends, just himself. Once the soldiers left, he wandered away, alone. His father had been right. Everyone he met along the way had been dangerous. There was no Stone Valley, no White Fairy, nothing but lies. Why was the world so cruel? Overcome with rage, Mako ripped the Book of Leaves apart. Pages scattered in the wind, lost forever. Eventually, he reached the outskirts of a ruined city, a city once filled with light and life, now cold, dead. For the first time, he stood among its towering buildings, a lost boy in a world that had already left him behind. Mako stood frozen, surrounded by abandoned cars. The streets were empty, lifeless, except for the distant, gut-wrenching screams. Zombies! He had no choice but to hide under a car, pressing himself against the cold metal as the undead horde shuffled past. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, the streets fell silent. Only then did Mako dare to crawl out. Clutching the only photograph his mother had left him, he set off toward the location in the picture. A building that once stood tall, now just another decaying ruin. He pushed through the wreckage, his heart pounding in his chest. Inside, the place was in complete disarray. And then, he saw her. A woman in a flowing white dress stood by the window, bathed in soft light. She looked exactly like the woman in his photo. Could it be her, the fairy he had spent his whole life searching for? Mako stepped forward, reaching out with trembling fingers. His hand brushed against hers. Then, she bit him. Mako jerked back, his breath catching in his throat. She wasn't his mother. She was just another zombie. Staggering toward him, arms outstretched. Mako slammed the door shut, locking her inside. His chest tightened. He had wanted to believe. He needed to believe. But now his last shred of hope was gone. Tears burned his eyes. As he wandered through the ruins, he passed a wall covered in photographs. Faces of the lost, the missing. Carefully, he placed his mother's picture among them. She was part of the past now. Mako had nothing left. He kept walking, his footsteps aimless. Eventually, he entered a building, drawn by the booming sound of a broadcast. A massive hologram flickered before him, a man delivering a fiery speech. This isn't migration. This is an invasion. An invasion of our culture, our society, our homes, our world. Mako didn't understand the words, but the voice was loud, too loud, and the zombies heard it. They were coming. For the first time, Mako didn't run. There was nowhere left to hide. He simply put on his headphones and prayed. Even if I must leave my forest, it will never truly leave me. It will guide me to the ferry. As his whispered prayer filled the air, bullets rained down. One by one, the zombies collapsed. When Mako finally took off his headphones, everything was silent. Then, red sniper dots appeared all over his body. The military had arrived. They had saved him. But then, a soldier noticed the bite mark on his hand. His expression darkened. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a gun. He had no choice. Mako didn't beg, didn't cry. He just stepped forward and wrapped his arms around the soldier. That was all he wanted. One last embrace. The soldier hesitated. Then his eyes landed on something. A mark on Mako's skin. His breath caught. Lowering his gun, he turned to his squad, his voice filled with urgency. He has the mark. The military took Mako with them. For the first time in forever, he had hope. The film never explains what the mark means, but we can guess. Maybe it's the reason Mako never turned. Maybe somewhere in his blood lies the key to saving humanity. The movie carries a heavy, haunting weight. Unlike traditional zombie films packed with chases and brutal fights, this story feels slow, suffocating, like a nightmare you can't wake up from. It begins in the deep wilderness, where a father and son live in isolation. Then the world slowly expands, more people, a bigger reality. And then, the horror erupts. A father, forced to kill the woman he loved. A mother sacrificing everything to protect her naive child. A man who couldn't bring himself to kill his undead children, so he locked them away, watching over them in twisted devotion. In this world, survival is terrifying. Every character carries their own despair, but none more than Mako. The young actor delivers an unforgettable performance. His fearful eyes, his cautious way of looking at others from beneath his brow. The way he moves as if always bracing for something awful. He grew up in a world of fear and death, and it shows.
Today's story comes to an end, but the journey of exploring great movies continues. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any exciting upcoming videos. Also, leave a comment sharing your thoughts on the movie. Your support is the biggest motivation for me to create even more quality content. See you in the next video.